Welcome to the Top Order podcast and Merry Christmas to all of our listeners and viewers. England win, making a hollow victory for the English, or is it exciting? We'll find out on the pod a little bit later on. Another two-day test match. Is it time we change the narrative about what test cricket is supposed to look like? Financial implications for Cricket Australia. They are going to be writing to Santa for an advance on next year's Christmas money. And we'll also talk some of the key players and changes and thoughts for the Sydney New Year's Test. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Oh, well, we get a swish this week after applause last week on the pod. Bar humbug, Stuart. Just the three of us here in the studio. Well, I say in the studio. I'm not in the studio. I am at home with my debut size 4 Duncan Fearnley Magnum behind me. Not the normal backdrop, but you've got to keep it cricketing at Christmas. You boys, obviously, in the studio in Auckland. I'll come to you boys. For some opening thoughts. But 2-day test match at the MCG. 94,000 fans on day one, which was some form of record. It always seems to be a record at the MCG, Baldy. They're I guess a little bit like an England cricket team. They find a stat that matches, whether it's the height of release point or the amount of revolutions. It could have been punters in or hot dogs sold, but certainly a big day at the G. It looked pretty full. But your initial thoughts on that first test match? On that test match, sorry.
Yeah, it was over so quickly. I didn't really know what to do with myself. I had my Boxing Day tradition of sitting down and watching the cricket, and I was strapped in for a good 5 days of entertainment, and it was over so quickly. We left the house and went to the beach for 3 days. So it was a massive disruption to our Christmas to New Year plans, and I can only hope that the curators in Sydney sort their game out so that we can have a proper relax over that New Year period and really, watch some genuine 4 or 5 days of cricket on the couch. I mean, my couch has 0 indentations from my backside in it whatsoever over this Christmas break. It is really disappointing, to be honest, Stu.
I mean, when normally on the pod we go back to the victor's side. That's what I'm going to do here. I know you opened the show, but I guess you mentioned it in the intro, and I wrote that line about the hollow victory, and I'm really just keen to get your thoughts because it's such a weird one, right? Because England win this test, which is the first time in 19 matches, almost 15 years in Australia. New Zealand has similar kind of numbers, so I'm not throwing stones. I was trying to put myself in New Zealand's shoes. How would I feel about the situation? Because it's 3-0 in the series, though, and I think if we look at how the series has gone, it's gone well below England's expectations. They went over there, hopeful that they could really push this Australian side. How was, that experience for you as an English fan? Was there delight? Was there relief, that you finally actually be able to tick that box? Does it feel hollow, like we said? Or, like Baldy said, is it just confusion because it just happened so quickly and then it was all over?
Yeah, I think. Well, if I've only got those 3 choices, I think it's probably the final one. It just is a bit confusing, really. And I think, look, it's a difficult one, isn't it? And I suppose as a cricket fan, explaining cricket to a non-cricket fan, they're always kind of a little bit sort of perplexed when you talk about 2 things. Number one is that a game can last 5 days. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? And you can have a draw. And then the other one is that you continue to play after a series has been decided. So Australia 3-0 up 2 to play. Normally you're off to the 19th hole or whatever the equivalent is, depending on the sport, and you're done at that point. So it is a little bit strange, but I think we all know as Test cricket fans that regardless of the rhetoric, there is still plenty to play for in a series that might be over in terms of the scoreline and the series result. But look, we haven't won for so long in Australia. I can't really even remember particularly well the victory before that 2011 series. I've got to go back to 1986 as an Englishman for a series victory, certainly. but yeah, to me, I think, yeah, there was a little bit of euphoria. I was lucky enough to be at the MCG in 98, 99 when England snagged that test match after the series was over. And I tell you what, it didn't ruin my night out in Melbourne at all with any sort of hollowness of victory. And so I'm really, really pleased for those boys. And I think the other factor is that Australia didn't really tinker too much, did they, with their team? It wasn't like they decided to blood a couple of players. They went out, as they've done all the way through the series, picking a side. And Ronald McDonald has been pretty clear on that, hasn't he? That they are picking test match by test match with the best combination that they can think of to win the game. So, on this one, obviously no spin in Nathan Lyon. Murphy, I think, was in the squad, but rightly, he didn't play, and Jai Richardson came in. So, I think if Australia had sort of given up and started to bring in some of their A players, it might have felt a little bit different. But look, I've just got to be pretty happy that we've snagged a test match in a place where we don't snag too many test matches, to be honest, Stu.
And Baldy, I mean, from your point of view, I know you're always a hard taskmaster on the Australian side, so I feel like I already know what you're going to say here. Pretty disappointed with the result, but I mean, Binksy did say, it didn't feel like Australia was taking the game lightly, but they are missing Cummins, Lyon, Hazelwood. They're missing the core of their bowling lineup. Obviously, Stark has been incredibly good. They've already ticked the boxes in winning this test series. It was a pitch where it became a bit of a lottery. Are you really annoyed about how things went?
Yeah, absolutely. The Boxing Day test is the marquee test on the Australian cricket summer calendar. It is one of the marquee tests in the world cricket calendar. And for it only to last 2 days and to set all sorts of unwanted records along the way, regardless of who won the test match, it's a massive disappointment for cricket fans, not just for Australian fans. We can talk about the Australian performance as we go through this podcast, as we go through this conversation. But my disappointment mainly streams from the imbalance between bat and ball throughout the test match, and we'll get to some of the whys and wherefores of that, I'm sure. But overall, the disappointment really is that we should have had 5 days of tremendously entertaining cricket, or maybe 3.5 or 4 days of tremendously entertaining cricket, if we want to think about it in that way. But we were denied that entertainment and that spectacle. And I think that's the disappointing part. And there will be ramifications from a macro financial level right the way down to individual levels, I think, coming out of this test match. And so there are some definite lessons learned, in the same way that there had to be lessons learned after the 2017-18 MCG Boxing Day test, where the pitch was on the other extreme of balance between bat and ball, and there were massive ramifications for that in the aftermath of that test as well. So I think we will see change. I think we will see ramifications, and I think Todd Greenberg, as the CEO of Australian cricket, will be wielding a reasonably big stick, I think, going forward, because having lost however many $1 million in a 2-day Perth test, you can multiply that by a significant factor to go into a Melbourne test where, as Binksy said, we made up some numbers, but the official number at the ground was something like 92,000, the most since the 2015 World Cup final. So for that to miss out on 3 days of that ticket revenue, of that food revenue, of that beer snake revenue, corporate hospitality revenue, and then all of the other associated revenue for all of the bars and the nightlife, and etc. And I mean, there will still be that to a certain extent, but I think you're going to miss out on a lot of that revenue, and that's a big hole to fill from a financial perspective. But first and foremost, we were denied that entertainment across those 3 days, which is a major disappointment, I think.
Before we kind of get to some of those implications, can I throw a question to you, Binksy, that I heard on the radio when I was listening to a bit of the comms, and it was actually a friend of the show, Bharat Sundaresan, who kind of mentioned it, and it was near the end of the game, around the time where obviously we knew that the game was going to sort of finish up in 2 days, and basically he said something, I'm paraphrasing, and hopefully I kind of got the sense of what he was saying, is that test matches have changed. There is a lot of call when something like this happens, a 2-day test happens, and everyone's a lot of old players. Even I had friends in group chats and texting me saying, "This isn't Test cricket. I hate this. This is this is just glorified T20." All of this kind of chat. Is there some degree now on analysts and fans and people that are experiencing the game to kind of change with the change that is happening? Because we are seeing, we have just seen a test series here in New Zealand where we've seen 5-day tests, or a couple of those tests went 5 days, old grinding kind of test cricket. But sometimes, and more regularly, we are now seeing very short tests. We saw it in India, South Africa. We saw it in we've seen it in the series. Is there a bit of it that's on us now to sort of adapt with the change that is happening? Or are we justified to feel this disappointment that sort of everyone seems to be feeling?
Yeah, I'm trying on the hoof to think of an analogy, but my initial response really is no. I don't think we should have to change this drastically as fans. I think that the best I can come up with at short notice is imagine that you've and look, I'll stretch this analogy because this is an implication of this test match. Imagine you've saved up a lot of money to go to Heston Blumenthal's restaurant, and your expectation is you're going to get a 7-course degustation menu, and you pay your money, and you walk in there and you get the first 3 courses, and they're brilliant and they're entertaining, and they give you this sort of, I've got the experience of his wonderful restaurant and all of these different things. And then they go, yeah, it's done after 3. You're not going to get the other. You're not going to get the other 4 courses and the nice dessert wine. Off you go. But you've still had a little taste of it, and you've still left feeling fulfilled. But ultimately, I think you're still feeling shortchanged. So I think yes, you can't really legislate for an occasion where someone might blow a side away with 7 for in the first innings or whatever, and all of a sudden a test match is going to be truncated if you have an amazing bowling performance, or maybe just that little bit of imbalance on day one. But normally it flattens out, doesn't it? It gets a little bit easier, and the test match has the opportunity to recalibrate. We just didn't see that in this game. There was just that ridiculous imbalance between bat and ball, and regardless of how England have played their cricket and Australia have played their cricket throughout the course of this season, you can't say that those players were not capable of putting on a longer show. It was clearly because there was just too much in it from a bowling perspective. I don't think we need to change in our expectations that drastically. I think we definitely need to recalibrate our expectations for other reasons. Over rates are poor. We very rarely see 90 overs in a day anymore. It's more like 75 to 80 is de rigueur. We are going to see games in 3.5 to 4 days finished quite regularly because of the pace at which teams score now. So that's a slight argument, but 2 days is probably not on the spectrum that we would expect to see. I don't think in terms of a contest.
I agree. I mean, the game moves faster these days, and I think as fans we need to a certain extent, just put up and shut up with that, because on the back of that game moving faster, we also get slightly higher scoring rates. We get players doing spectacular things that we otherwise ordinarily wouldn't see. I mean, how often do you see a man like Harry Brook charge a fast bowler when you're 3 for 8 chasing 150? You just don't see that 20 years ago, but now you can, right? And so the entertainment ball by ball factor goes up, the shortness of the game goes down slightly, and there will be some fans, maybe fans that are a little bit like me, that go, well, actually I'll take some slightly less ball by ball action for a longer test match. Some fans, and I spoke to a couple in this last week, who actually said, well, I quite enjoyed the Perth test because
I've heard a few that said the same thing.
Because it was happening all the time. I could watch the game casually in the background, and things were happening all the time. It was capturing my attention, whereas ordinarily a 2 for 100 session wouldn't capture my attention. So, there are those elements. What I want to do, if we can, is talk about this wicket, because
go for it.
because, and I've prepared some remarks, so settle in, listeners, and Binksy and Stu, right?
But before you start, so is that where we're shouldering most of the load for this test?
I want to unpack it a little bit, right? Because it is not as clear and cut and dried as this wicket was awful, and it is not as clear and as cut and dried as batters just need to have better defensive techniques, because we've heard both arguments over the last 48 hours, right?
Yeah.
So at a macro level, what makes a good cricket wicket? A number of things. One, it is capable of sustaining a test match that can go into the 5th day and provide a result. This pitch did not do that, regardless, I think, of who played and how good they were. This pitch and this test match was not going to go 5 days on the wicket that was presented itself. Mm-hmm. And we would be hypocritical for not criticising the wicket for that. If we criticise a wicket that turns excessively, we should be equally as critical of a wicket that provided excessive seam movement, that did not provide for an even contest between bat and ball, which is hallmark number 2. And hallmark number 1 is it's capable of sustaining a test match that can go 4 or 5 days. Yeah. The other hallmark of a good cricket wicket is one where the toss does not necessarily decide the outcome, right? So as much as we malign wickets that are progressively more and more turn-friendly, winning the toss and batting first when the batting conditions are at their best is often, not always, but often crucial to success in a test match, because you know that the batting wicket is only going to get worse. This wicket did not last long enough to become a good batting wicket, right? The match did not last long enough to become a good batting wicket. So contrary to the turning wickets, poor wicket perception, this one was not good enough for too long a period to the seam bowlers to not allow batters to thrive. So not only was there an imbalance between bat and ball that lasted for too long in the test match. I mean, ideally, right, not winning the toss should mean that batting is tough for the first little while, but you get the advantage of maybe being able to bowl in the last innings where the pitch is starting to wear and having the advantage of bowling last. Neither side got the advantage of that. Neither side got the advantage of batting in the second and third innings where on days 2, 3 and a bit, 4 maybe, it was good conditions for batting. We didn't really see until maybe the very back end of the test match, Binksy, any good batting conditions, which forced the batters to try a different game approach that only accelerated the game to try and score runs. That they determined that the best way to score runs was just to attack, and the ball would have our name on it eventually, right? That was the mentality. So for all of those factors, this was a very, very poor test cricket wicket. I will say this, though. The players have established in that scenario that attack was their best mode of progressing the test match and giving themselves an opportunity to win. You do have to have a look, though. When Australia won the toss and batted, right, on day 1, if we have a look at the dismissal of all of the batters on day 1 in the first innings, Travis Head chose to cut a ball that was way too close to his stumps. Nothing to do with the wicket, right? That particular ball. Jake Weatherall was strangled down the leg side. Nothing to do with the wicket, right? You'd have a look at the combined dismissals of Marnus Labuschagne, Steve Smith and Usman Khawaja. Now, Marnus flashed at one outside off stump. Arguably, he does that quite frequently anyway. So let's say that that's 50-50 wicket, 50-50 bad shot. Steve Smith chose to drove at a ball that was a little bit loose, had a loose shot, but ball gap between bat and pad, let's say 50-50, wicket did something, loose technique.
Lovely ball, though.
Lovely delivery. same with the Khawaja delivery.
Putting that in the in your little bag and in your photo memory bank.
Absolutely. And the tongue delivery to Khawaja, was it tongue that got Khawaja? Whoever got Khawaja bowled an absolute peach as well. So between those three, 50-50, 1.5 wickets maybe down to the pitch and 1.5 wickets to good bowling / maybe not great shot play. Pretty sure it was the first innings Cameron Green ran himself out. So that's entirely
second, I think.
No, first one. First one, second one, he slashed off in the second innings.
Yeah, first innings was a runner.
And Alex Carey fell for the leg side trap. So in the first innings, in the top 7 batters, when batting was potentially at its worst from a conditions perspective, you have to say at least 4 of the top 7 were not victims of a wicket that did tremendous amount on that first day. So you do have to temper the wicket was poor, which it was, with it wasn't entirely responsible for the falling of all of those wickets. Now, there was a bunch of other stuff that happened where it was doing a bit and then players had decided, well, one's going to have my name on it, so I may as well try and maximise my scoring opportunities and blah, 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 blah. So you can say that there's a combination of factors. But I think it's unfair to not be critical of the wicket, but I also think it's unfair to say, well, it was unplayable, because for a couple of batters. I thought Kawaja looked pretty comfortable for the most part of his innings until he got a good one and nicked off. I thought Brook looked pretty comfortable because he was trying to smash it and didn't care where the ball pitched because he was either ramping it or advancing or smashing it over point or mid-wicket or whatever. So there was a method for success on that wicket. I just don't think, for the most part, many of the batters, until we got to maybe England's second innings, really found a method that worked.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Binksy?
Baldy, you're on a pretty good ramp. You didn't see me call timeout during it.
No, I ignored you completely.
Yeah, good. Yeah, look, I don't disagree with the commentary that you've just gone through in terms of the ball by ball. And that ball by ball coverage, I think we might get a copyright strike for that. It was very close to actually what happened. But I think what we don't look at, and you did mention it, is the effect that has on you as a batter if you think that there is one with your name on. So whilst those deliveries might not have been the one that seemed excessively or whatever, it was the fact that probably the next one might have done. And you had to keep your pad out the way. You were likely to nick one. So there's that element. But I think even if you just look at this with one really, really simple statistic, there wasn't a single half century in this Test match. So that would be, and Baldy, I'm sure you've not run this particular stat, but I can't imagine that happens too often, that there isn't a single half century in a Test match. So that balance piece between bat and ball, just wasn't there.
100% agree. 100% agree. Yeah, I mean, the mitigating factor is that you do also have to look at the facts of the dismissals, but the overarching thing in this case, not so much in the Perth Test, but particularly in this case, is I think the batters thought, I'm going to have one with my name on it here because it is doing so much that I can't cover my off stump. I can't cover the inside and outside edge of my bat. I'm going to get one with my name on it. So I'm either just going to have to try and graft it out and see how I go, which is kind of Kawaja's method. I thought his technique was very good on that wicket.
Man,
in the first innings, it was. In the first innings, technique was get off me, don't hurt me. It was a terrible shot.
Yeah, it wasn't a great shot in the second innings, but it's hard to judge a technique on two balls, I think, sometimes. But I think the way that Harry Brook played was perfect for that situation, and it played into his hands because that's the way he naturally plays anyway. It's not like we saw Kawaja decide, I'm just going to go for everything and completely change my game plan. It was perfect for him, and he executed perfectly.
And that's the spectrum, isn't it? You'll have someone like a Steve Waugh would have just been like, I'm going to graft and, it's over my dead body. But then he gets the luxury of, if he then gets one with his name on, he goes, well, the wicket was poor. So there was one with my name on. Whereas if you take the Harry Brook approach and you get out having a slog and it goes up the chimney, it's like, you don't get that, I tried to graft and I couldn't. It was, I tried to do the absolute opposite of that. Because I didn't want the one with my, with my name on. But look, ultimately, Baldy, it's really going to be interesting to see what happens, because I don't really think you want the accountants getting involved in even subtle direction. You don't want the CEO saying, your objective, Mr. Groundsman, is that we gain revenue from this match, please. I know that that's a fact that needs to be the case. And I asked you on the private message channel that we had, like, Cricket Australia made a loss last year. Like, I mean, I'd love to know that, because the outsider looking in goes, you're one of the big three in terms of the revenue share from the ICC. You've got what looks like a successful franchise tournament that's owned by Cricket Australia that operates in the Big Bash. Like, how is Australian cricket losing money? That's a really big problem, I think, for world cricket, if one of the big three can't turn a profit from their home board. But look, maybe that's for another podcast. But the point I'm really making here is that the moment you get the accountants involved, then it isn't about produce the best wicket for Test cricket. And I'm sure Matt Page was trying to make the best wicket for this game. He was not trying to make a wicket that had the game over in 2 days and it's seaming all over the shop. But it's difficult because it is a combination of art and science, and he's just made an artful decision here that's gone horribly wrong. in leaving
he's
that
made
much grass on
he's
it.
made a mistake, and as long as we acknowledge that, with the best of his own intentions, and let's be clear, Cricket Australia does not put the pressure on groundsmen in Australia to produce wickets of a certain state, but I think the unwritten rule for any groundsman is you want to produce entertaining cricket on your ground. It's a matter of personal pride, right? So he did not go out there to produce a wicket that was either massively beneficial to Australia as a bowling unit or massively difficult to bat on and make the test a lottery. None of that has entered into his equation. He's tried to produce a good test wicket and just got, for whatever reason, got it wrong, and it's easy for us as non-expert groundsmen to say, well, if you had 7 mils of grass on it last year, why don't you have 7 mils of grass on it this year? And a test match has to go 4 days before day 4 and 5 when it may or may not wear. All of these things are very easy for us to say in hindsight. What we can say is that pitch was poor. The experts need to reflect on that and improve upon how they produce wickets in the future. And we don't want that going forward as a thing, right? That is not what we want. And I think everyone's agreed on that. And I think we should be, and we will be, critical of the outcome of that surface. Not the intent of it, but the outcome of it. And, curators, as much as anyone else, are judged on outcomes these days, and they'll be judged on that, and they'll have to reflect and change. And there might be change in the way that they are not instructed to, but the parameters around which they're preparing grounds might change in future. But I would hate for the governing body in Australia to dictate how wickets are prepared. I think that is a formula. That is a formula for disaster, because then there are all sorts of financial implications and all the rest of it.
Especially if you're a CEO who's made an $11 million loss the previous year, you probably just concentrate on your own knitting. But I guess I really hope that Matt Page's wife cuts his hair, because otherwise every barber he goes into for the rest of his life are going to be asking him if he wants 10 millimeters off the top, aren't they? Lip, do you want to move us on?
Yeah, move us on, Stu. Move us forward, Stu. Move us forward. Let's talk about some of the players that had to actually execute on this pitch then, because, there are some players that we should probably talk about. I would say the first one is probably Josh Tongue. Binksy, maybe you want to talk about him. I have to say, I thought we might have seen him, right the way through the series once Wood wasn't around. What have you? Well, the thing is that England. I think we can say that England have had little moments in this series where they've bowled and put a lot of pressure on Australia. But I think, for the most part, they've bowled probably too short at times and haven't been able to sustain enough pressure on Australia. What I love what Tongue did is he just bowled. Yes, again, all of that stuff you've said about the pitch, but he pitched it up, he bowled to the conditions, and he made Australia work, and he got his just reward in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing I just want to touch upon, we made the comment earlier on that Australia were missing Cummins and Hazelwood and have done for the majority of this series. Let's be honest, England have been missing someone that they would have wanted to play a lot of this series in Mark Wood. And obviously, someone that's going to miss a decent proportion of the series that they would have wanted to play all of it in Jofra Archer as well. So, and I'm not saying that they are as good an attack. They're clearly not as good an attack as that Australian attack. But from a personnel perspective, and England have had to shuffle the cards a little bit in terms of their pace attack. When it
they're
comes
both first choice, though, aren't they, Binksy? They're like Wood and Archer were both first choice.
Absolutely. When it then comes to Josh Tongue, and I think this is a really, really general point of view, we've been planning, rightly or wrongly, and wrongly as it turns out when you look at the scoreline after the first 3 test matches, but we've been planning for a long time to bring an attack with pace to Australia, to bowl the kind of lengths that probably would be troubling to batsmen on Australian pitches. And let's be honest, in terms of what's been successful, we've seen a lot of success for kind of pitch up bowlers. So, Michael Neser, Scott Boland, in this test match, Josh Tongue, who bowls that slightly fuller length. And, I won't get the stats exactly right, but, if you talk about the most successful length being probably between 5 and 7 metres in Australia, it looks as if, Tongue has been bowling probably somewhere between 3 and 6 metres, and that's been the successful length. So that England came with a plan, and he probably wasn't, based on that plan. where they needed to be. Whether or not they should have realised that a little bit earlier and got him in a little bit earlier, we can't really ever answer that question. But certainly, he seemed to be exactly the tonic that we needed. The other factor I think is Gus Atkinson has been a little bit disappointing. I know he's limped off with a hamstring injury in this Test match, but this is by far his worst series in terms of returns. He didn't look like he was going to take a wicket in the series at one point. He was probably that bowler that you expected to do that. Pitch up slightly fuller, hit the top of our stump, LB, bowled, and the nick off, all in play all the time, and at a decent enough pace. And then I think probably the other factor that they would have had with Tong is, from an economy perspective, he has typically been a little bit sort of off with the radar. He doesn't build lots and lots of pressure, but he bowls balls that take wickets, and that's probably a little bit like what they would have expected from Mark Wood, right? They're kind of like wind him up 4 or 5 over spells. He's going to go for a few, but he's going to have impact with his wicket taking ability, and that's what I think they would have wanted from Josh Tong. And look, they've certainly got it throughout the course of this this series. He's on the honours board at the MCG in a Boxing Day Test match for 5 wickets. I thought looked really, really threatening throughout the course. And look, it's a little bit of an old cliche, but he said, his angle of delivery that's past the perpendicular, as Richie Beno would say. He's angling the ball in a way that's unfamiliar to the batsman. And he said, I don't know whether it's actually going to then nip away or not. So if I don't know that, what chances the batter got? Yeah. So look, I thought he bowled really, really well. I think I've definitely got him in my, my starting attack now. I think he's certainly probably gone past a couple. But just before I move on, I do also want to just say that Bryden Carse has got a lot of stick throughout the course of this series. He's our leading wicket taker in this series. And I think regardless of, whether or not you rate him or not, this kid has run in and bowled his heart out throughout the course of this series. And look, as I said, leading wicket taker on a sinking ship. So I thought he was actually pretty good as well, particularly in the second innings of this game. That's just finished up, obviously.
Yeah, showed some ticket cast because he's been really panned throughout this series, and he has bowled short and wide in periods, right? There are periods of this series where he has bowled short and wide, particularly to Travis Head. I think the second innings in Perth, Travis Head got to him a little bit. But he has bounced back in this Test match. Atkinson wasn't great early in the series and has showed a little bit of ticket to bounce back. I thought he bowled much, much better in Melbourne than he did anywhere else before he was injured. So it was surprising in a good way that those two in particular were able to take on board all of the, post-Noosa, post-Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane feedback, and then produce something of quality in the Boxing Day Test match. And you can argue that they had nothing to lose and there was only one way to go and that was up and blah, 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 blah. But you still need to go out and produce for your country, right? It would be very easy for them to physically run in and go, this is not going well for me again, and then the head to drop and then bad stuff to happen, which we've seen happen to touring teams in Australia time and again. So I think they do need to get some credit for the way that they performed because they pulled their socks up. Whatever post-Noosa criticism, post-series ending criticism they took on board, they delivered as a bowling unit a performance, particularly I think in the first innings, that was on par with their first innings in Perth, which I thought they were the most deadly looking in terms of like they could do someone an injury, they could, not only take a wicket, but really, cause some physical discomfort. And we saw Marnus get hit twice in this Test match on the hand. So I think England deserve a bunch of credit for bowling the ball in the right areas, probably better than Australia did overall in this Test match, particularly in the second innings. We didn't quite get it right. And England certainly didn't go to the stupid bouncer ploy to number 9, 10, 11, which still drives me mad. Honestly, on a wicket like this, where good batters, the best batters in the world, Joe Root and Steve Smith nicked off or had one go straight through the gate. They are the two best batters of this generation, other than maybe Virat Kohli and Kane Williamson. If they can't defend their stumps, Why can Bryden Cast defend his stump so well that you have to bowl him a ball that's short and wide outside off stump? It's insane. It is absolutely insane. And in a low-scoring game, Gus Atkinson, how many make in 30-odd?
Yeah, 20,
Cast made a bunch of runs in the first innings. Like, those runs were vital for England to, one, get over 100 for a start and give themselves something to be at least competitive with. But in a game where Australia were only 4 wickets away at the end, those runs from Cast and Atkinson at the bottom of the innings, absolutely vital. And Australia, in an attempt to accelerate the game, went away from everything that had worked to that point to bowl balls that were only dangerous if you happened to hit the ball straight down an outfielder's throat. You miss by a metre and it's 4 or 6 runs. Absolutely insane tactics. So we talk a lot about good captaincy. That was a period where we got that horribly wrong. And it was easy to see, even in the moment, that was going to go wrong for Australia, because England have attacked Australia in that way in this series well in the past. Yes, it worked in Perth and we took 4 for spit, but actually that tactic allowed Jofra Archer to get to 50 because he was able to accelerate the game, and he batted beautifully when they pitched up and he batted beautifully when they pitched short. But honestly, targeting the top of off stump, if it's good enough to dismiss Weatherald and Stokes and Marnus and Smith and Root and Duckett and Crawley, it's good enough to dismiss the tail. I'm sorry. And that was a massive, massive mistake from Australia.
I think
I will just point out that Bryden Cast only got 4, but yeah, other than that, all of that.
But he stuck around, and that partnership was worth what, 15, 20, and in the context of the match, that was an important partnership. But yeah, sure, he only got 4 in that particular case.
I do think, I mean, we won't go into it now. We'll go into it after the series, but I do think Binksy's point around, the lengths and how they might have reshuffled the bowling attack in hindsight is probably a good one that we might explore. England, I'm talking about now. It seems, like you say, Binksy, it seems like this whole series, they've come with this mindset that they're going to blast Australia out. And, with the way that these 4 tests have played out, I think they might have been better, and again, in hindsight, to just focus on relentless pressure on this Australian batting lineup that does have the flaws.
But that's what Atkinson was there to do, right?
Yeah.
Archer and Wood were there to blast Australia out. Atkinson was there to hit the top of off stump. And then you had Bryden Cast to be a bit more of an intimidating bowler. Now, unfortunately for Cast, across the first 3 tests in the main, he was too short and too wide. He probably got carried away with the length a little bit too much. And we've seen lots of bowlers come to Australia, particularly in Perth, get carried away with the bounce.
I wonder if Cast sort of had that, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing here.
Possibly.
I mean, you'd hope not, but it did feel like that at times.
But Atkinson didn't execute the first couple of tests that he played, right? And that was his role to do that.
And I genuinely believe if Chris Wokes hadn't have done his shoulder in that last test and then obviously retired, I think he would have been on this tour, and I think he'd have been a lot more effective on this tour than he had been on previous tours. And again, one thing we've not talked about throughout the course of this, and I don't propose we segue into it massively, but the ball's different as well to 4 or 5 years ago. That this newer Kookaburra ball has got a bit more rope on it and is a bit harder than it has been historically. So I think that has also probably factored in and puts a little bit of context to probably some of the stats that we're seeing in these games, but certainly not to the extent that the game should be done and dusted well inside 2 days.
There are not many batters that seem to come out of this game with their heads held high, but someone that has seemed to get a bit of praise is Jacob Bethell for the way he played, and just I think more probably some of the shots that he played in that second innings when he got his 40. Obviously, he came in for Ollie Pope. There was a lot of chat before the series about whether he was going to, leading into the series about whether who was going to take that spot. And then throughout the series, there was, I think, some hope that Ollie Pope might, maybe this is the Ollie Pope series that he'll regain and show that he's the one. He hasn't managed to do that, and Bethell has come in. I mean, Binksy, I think you've been advocating for Bethell really for a while now to come in and take that spot. But do you think he's done enough to, for this to be a permanent change?
I'd be very surprised if he's not given. Well, okay, let me caveat this slightly. I am assuming at this stage that McCullum will stay on till the end of his contract, which is 2027. I'm also therefore assuming that Rob Key will stay on as well. So I think that if that's the case, which I believe it will be, we will see Bethell being given as much of a run as other players have been given, and that for me is probably the next 12 to 18 months for him to come in. Where he'll bat, I don't know. Obviously the vacancy is at number 3, but there's probably a few questions on how that might be shuffled around, and maybe we'll cover that when we come to our series wrap up. But I probably just want to highlight a couple of things. I think forget about the ramp shots and forget about all the funky stuff. He came down the wicket and played an absolute on drive. It was nothing more than just a little punch, and then followed that up with a checked cover drive. He just looks absolutely class. And regarding all this bollocks about, well, he's not scored a first class 100 and all these kind of stats. I'm sorry, we don't say that about some of these Indian players that are coming into the IPL at the age of 14 or whatever. Okay, they might have some first class runs behind them, but we're looking at going, this is a generational talent. We can see that it's a generational talent. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Bad analogy for cricket because you don't want ducks, obviously. But ultimately, the kid looks the absolute business. He looked quality down in New Zealand last year. In those test matches, and okay, he didn't score 100, but he scored an 80 odd and another 50 and looked really, really good. That's enough for me to say that he's better than our generation's Mark Ramprakash in Ollie Pope, who has all the talent, averages 60 in first class cricket. He's on grey nick. He's got the sweatbands in the right place. He looks like a cricketer, but he just can't translate it on the biggest stage. He's got, there's a mental block there somewhere, isn't there? For Ollie Pope. So for me, we see Bethell come into that side. And I think, again, I don't want to sort of preempt the post-series wrap-up, but I don't actually see too many changes to the batting lineup now. I was feeling pretty disheartened when we went 3-0 down, but Crawley's done what we wanted him to do in this series. He's actually looked okay. Duckett's been the opener that we've been concerned about, but, you're not going to throw him out because of 6 points in Noosa and 1 bad series. He's been the best opening batter in world cricket, arguably for the last 3 or 4 years on stats. So I don't think there'll be too many changes, but yes, I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot more of Jacob Bethell in a white England cricket shirt.
I think it's very easy to overreact after 3 test matches. And yes, they are the 3 most important test matches in the careers of some of these England players. But I think if you look at the series in its totality, which we need to do, I think there are some very interesting conversations about what England do with Jacob Bethell going forward, because yes, he's a generational talent. No, he hasn't achieved a first class or professional 100. Does he have a one day 100? He might have a one. Might have a one.
He has a list day 100. I think now.
He has a list day 100. Doesn't have a first class or test 100, and he's in the test team batting at number 3. Is this just an identification of supreme talent, like a Tendulkar, like a Suryavanshi, like a whoever, or is there something to reconcile between that and someone like James Roux, who has 11 first class hundreds and he's 21 years old and has broken Compton's record for the fastest to 10 first class hundreds in terms of test and games and age and all the rest of it. So how do you reconcile the talent identification versus, groundswell of performance? Because from an Australian perspective, the guys that have performed well for us over the last 12 months have been guys who have had a very good background in first class cricket. Bo Webster's been around the series scene for a long time. After 2 tests, it looked like Jake Weatherall was going to be a success after his innings in Brisbane, and he'd been around the first class scene for a long time. So it's very difficult to reconcile the 2 trains of thought. Do you just inject the guy, Bethell, Constas, etc., on pure talent alone, or do you have them go through a process of getting into that national side? And it's not the same for everybody, but unfortunately, everyone is going to get tarred with the same brush by fans who will just look at one player and another and want them to be compared in exactly the same way. But of course, they're not exactly the same player. None of them are.
And mate, if Stokes carries on as captain for the next 2 years, there's a chance that Bethell becomes England's next Test captain as well.
Yeah, entirely possible. Entirely possible. Look, I think there's lots of questions for England after this series. Is Brook better off batting at number 3 and bringing Bethell in at 5 to blood him in Test cricket in a position that's not got as much criticism around it? But these are all questions for the post-series wrap-up, I think.
Is there anyone you want to touch on for Australian point of view? I know you guys had a big chat about Cameron Green last week, so we probably don't need to rehash that. Although, I mean, again, looking forward to Sydney, it seems like.
No questions get answered, right? And the challenge, I think Kerry O'Keefe pointed it out on commentary, you select a guy to bat at number 7, he bats like a number 7. So what do you do with Cameron Green? I still haven't figured it out yet, and I think a lot of fans are still trying to figure out how they view him. I mean, you have a look at guys on the chopping block for England. I think Crawley, Pope, maybe not Duckett, but I think those guys have averaged more than Cameron Green in this series, and Pope was dropped by the England side. So what do you do with that guy? He averages 50, I think, with the ball this series. He averages 20-something with the bat. So he is not performing to the level of talent that he has. What do we do with him? I don't know. We definitely should not make a change for Sydney, right? He should be given every opportunity to perform in the Australian jersey because his talent demands that. But I think at what point do you go, well, actually, let's take the name and the potential out of it. That position in the Australian team needs to perform in order for Australia to be successful. The output of that position needs to be something that's successful for us. So I think that there is a conversation that I don't know the answer to, and I think that's what's frustrating a lot of Australian fans is that the potential is there. Where is his best position in the team? At the moment, you could make an argument that the more responsibility you give them, the more information you're going to get about whether or not they're able to perform at that level. Batting him at 7 kind of gives him a bit of freedom, but it also means he's going to run out of partners pretty quickly. And that's
with Glenn Phillips for New Zealand.
And that's problematic in and of itself, right? So like how do you get that right? I think Kerry's been great at number 6.
Yeah, you'd like to know what that conversation was. Was it this frees you up, or was it Carey's better than you at the moment, mate? Like you're dropping down one.
Well,
but I find that really Carey has been magnificent in this series, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in the post-series wrap up. Apart from those horrendous blue wicket-keeping gloves, he's been absolutely superb, and deserves to bat at 6. But I think that's sending a pretty clear message to Cameron Green, isn't it? That's saying, mate, you've gone from number 3 to number 7, basically. Bo Webster
was at number 8 because
Webster must be pretty disappointed not to have got a Guernsey during this series.
Well, McDonald's been saying it the last 24 hours. And they obviously asked about the team for Sydney and bits and pieces. And he basically said Cameron Green, the reason Cameron Green has batted in a different spot each time is because we're fitting him in around other people because he's not locking down his spot, which, suggests that he's not that confident in what he's doing. And it's like you say, it's sending a clear message that you're not doing your job, whether that's, and now he's gone public with that. He's not afraid to say, look, you clearly aren't doing the job. Yeah. I mean, they've said that they'll consider Webster for the Sydney Test, but they've also released Webster in English to play BBL. So
I don't think the Australian team will change the top 7 in terms of personnel. I think they might change the order a little bit. I wouldn't mind seeing Green at 5 or 6. I think Khawaja's fine in the middle order. His output has looked pretty good. Second ball duck notwithstanding, I thought he was actually all right. And Adelaide, he gave his wicket away on a couple of occasions. But generally speaking, I think he looks more assured in the middle order than he does at the top of the order.
It's not a long-term solution, though, is it, Michael?
No, it's not, mate. No, it's not. And I think if you were looking for long-term solutions, you'd be looking to someone like Campbell Kellaway or Ollie Peake. But they're barely 20, 21 years old. And I think as good as they are, they're not Jacob Bethell and they're not Harry Brook. They are not ready necessarily for international cricket, yet they're still figuring out their game, as is Sam Constas, as is a number of Australian players under the age of 25 that you could argue that are going to play for Australia. I think Cooper Connolly's in that class. I think Hugh Webkin is in that class. There are a bunch of bowlers that are in that class, a bunch of pace bowlers in that class. they're just not quite ready yet. They need 2 or 3 seasons of hardened Sheffield Shield cricket before they really understand their game well enough that it would stand up to the likes of Atkinson, Tongue, etc. Yeah. They need to be able to answer those questions for themselves before they make the international team, those particular players. So, yeah, I don't think dropping Khawaja for the Sydney Test, I mean, he may retire after this game. We don't know. But, I mean, he may play in Sydney and then walk off into the sunset. And then we have a hole at number 5 for Cameron Green, and we might even have a spot at 7 for Bo Webster. Who knows going forward? So, yeah, I think Australia should stick with that team for the Sydney Test, and then we make decisions after that. Because what I will say is that on the basis of play, I don't think it is reflective of the way that the series has gone if that series finished 3-2. In terms of I know that England have had moments. I know that England have played well in parts. They played very well in Melbourne, and they won the battle there. But I think if this series finished 3-2, it is not a reflection of what actually took place when the series actually really mattered. So I actually think there's a lot for Australia to play for in Sydney, because they were disappointing from an output perspective in Melbourne. They were disappointing in the first innings, particularly in that first session, did not value their wicket enough. They didn't either value their wicket enough or throw their hand at it to try and do the Harry Brook thing and try and go, okay, well, if that's the case, I'm just going to smash it and see what happens. They didn't do either of those things, and they were bowled out and rolled for 150. So that will be disappointing for them. They got themselves into positions where they could fight back in the test match, didn't do the job. So I actually think that there will be something on Australia to give a better account of themselves in Sydney and actually show that they have been the dominant side in the first 3 test matches when it really mattered. And they need to finish this series with a 4-1 to make it actually reflective of the way that they would see that they've played their cricket and won those key moments. I think if they lost in Sydney, then there would be a lot of people saying, well, Australia did win the first 2, but they were outplayed for the last 2, and arguably, you know,
moral victory.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it would not be reflective of what they think they have put on the cricket field. So I think there'll be a little bit on the Australians, and there'll be lots of things to play for from an England perspective too, I'm sure.
Yeah, I will throw that to Binksy in a second. I will say I know we've moved on to Sydney. I will say I did really like seeing Joe Richardson back for Australia. Yep. Someone I've always enjoyed watching, and it was cool to see him
Cool to see him back. Didn't have the same impact that we had hoped that he would have. Certainly his pace was down from what we had seen, and I mean it's been 4 years since we've seen him in the Test arena. He was also maybe a fraction too straight as well. I know we talked a lot about Tongue targeting the stumps, but I think he bowled a little bit more middle and leg than I think we'd hoped, and maybe a little bit less fourth stump, top of off stump. But good to see him back in the Australian shirt. And I think he's one of the guys. He's 29, so he's got a few years ahead of him. He's going to maybe have 3 or 4 years once Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood, one of those guys starts to step away from the international scene before we start to see Straker and Callum Vidler and Lance Morris and Xavier Bartlett start to step up for Australia. So yeah, there's an opportunity for him going forward.
Binksy, all right. What is this? Well, maybe we talk selection right at the end, because there's a couple of questions for Baldy about Australia's selection, or at least one from the bowling attack. But what is this Sydney Test? How important is it to you? We just heard from Baldy. It's very important, for Australia, and I do think that's valid. If England come there and they make it 3-2, it again it's not going to be a hollow series victory if that happens, but I'm sure it will take a lot of the shine off if that is the case. What's England got to gain here from this final Sydney Test?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, listening to Baldy? I think that's exactly the message that should be being delivered in the Australian dressing room. Show the dominance that you've shown on the scoreboard throughout the course of this series. England, I think, will be having a slightly different conversation, or I'd be having a slightly different conversation. I'd be saying, guys, well done in Melbourne. And look, I guess as a fan, you're kind of looking at it with, they've won in Melbourne. To be honest, that game could have gone either way. But I think certainly the way England approached that chase, we've talked a lot about Duckett and Crawley at the top of the order. They really did set the tone for that. And
they were awesome.
They knocked a pretty decent dent off that. Off that target. But I think the message, from an England perspective would be, we had Australia in trouble in that first Test match, and then we failed to capitalise on it with the bat when we were the equivalent of 100 for 1 or whatever. We were in the game in Brisbane for a period of time, and then didn't bat particularly well. So I think they'll be kind of looking at it as if, what could have been if we'd have had a couple of sessions that were different. And I think the messaging to them will be, if we go and put in a really, really strong performance in Sydney, we are worthy of a 3-2 scoreline in this series. I don't think they'll be, claiming the moral victory as they did after we absolutely pantsed Australia in that Old Trafford Test match, and rumours of them praying for rain and dancing, and the jukebox was on and all kinds of stuff. But we're not. Well, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying England will be saying, if we put in a proper performance in Sydney, we're worthy of a 3-2 scoreline. And I think then when they reflect on that, they go, do you know what? Maybe the expectation of us coming and winning this series was pie in the sky. No one's done it for, or we've only done it twice in 40 odd years. It's a tough place to come and win a series. That's a pretty decent return, even though it's in the last 2 games. And then throw that into the planning for the next series and what they want to do.
On the team list, Atkinson will obviously be out. His hamstring injury, I think they've said today, yes, he'll miss the Sydney Test. How does that change things? Is Potts comes in for him? Do you think Bashir might get a crack, Sydney?
Yeah, look, who knows, really, mate. I think Potts was obviously in the original squad for the game, or for the series. Sorry, Matt Fisher is the guy that they've drafted in from the Lions. So those are the two seeming options that are on the table. And then I think Bashir. I just wonder whether Bashir's sort of persona non grata now. I think that they like what they've seen of Will Jacks. I know the SCG typically does spin. Does spin. It's probably the most historically it did, Baldy, and I think it's probably if you were going to say there's a game where you must play a spinner, it probably is the must play a spinner ground out of that. Out of those 5. But I can't see them picking Bashir. I think it will be a change of one seamer in that side. To be perfectly honest, I would like to see Fisher. But so that probably means Potts plays.
What about for you, Baldy? There was a bit of talk that Murphy wasn't going to play this game, but we'll probably see him in Sydney.
I think we'll see Murphy in for Joe Richardson. I think
you think it'll be Richardson.
I think Nice has done enough with the bat and the ball. I mean, his 35 in the first innings for Australia was pretty invaluable. And I think Murphy, him being in the squad over Richard Chioli and over Kuhneman and over the rest of them, gives us an indication that it will be him that's picked. And if that's the case, then we should go with Todd Murphy in for Joe Richardson, and everyone else stays the same. Given that their test was over in 2 days, workload's not an issue for Stark and Boland going forward. I think Nice has been very, very good. He took a 5 in this series. He's made runs in this series. He has given a very good account of himself. I think that the concern with Nisa is if England get on top of him, I'm not sure what he's going to do. Because if Harry Brook is going, he's the kind of guy that Harry Brook would go after, given that he's around about 135 Ks. He's not express. If the ball's not doing a lot and the pitch is significantly flatter in Sydney, which I think we probably have to expect that it is going to be a better batting track than we saw in Melbourne, then the opportunity for England to target Nisa is there. But I think the opportunity for England to target whoever Australia bring in would be there. I don't think Australia are going to go left field and pick a Xavier Bartlett to debut or any of those kind of non-capped test players. I think if they're going to go with either, Doggett, Joe Richardson or Nisa, I think will be the third seamer along with Todd Murphy. And look, Nisa's really done nothing wrong as he has throughout his test career. And as much as I'd like to see Joe Richardson going forward, I think Australia will stick with Nisa. So Richardson out, Todd Murphy in.
Very good. I think your point about, not to derail this too much, I think your point about the short tests and the workload, I expected that we might see Stark miss one of these games. But he hasn't missed a test in 3 summers. 2023, I think was the last time he missed a test for Australia. I think only Travis Head and maybe Carey have played every test match in that span, as has Mitchell Stark. So, touch wood, he'll continue to be fit for Australia and leading the attack because he's had a tremendous series and he deserves to have a 30 to 33 wicket series on the basis of what he's delivered for Australia through these first 4 tests. So he really deserves to go down
in the history of Test cricket as having one of the best Ashes series for Australia from a bowling contingent, because we would have been stuffed without him in the first 3 Test matches. He carried that attack, really carried it. And he hasn't had as great an impact in the last 2 Tests as he hit in the first 2, but if he had had the same impact in the last 2 as he did in the first 2, we'd be talking about a guy on the cusp of 40 wickets in the series, right? So, you can't have it all your own way as much as I'd like to.
Anything else before we wrap it up, Binksy?
Not from me. Yeah, looking forward to Sydney. And would be looking forward to the Carlton and United Brewing one-day series if that was what we did, but we don't anymore, do we? So we'll
sadly not.
We'll be returning home and doing something else. But yeah, really looking forward to Sydney, just hoping, particularly as it kind of leads into going back to work here in the UK, that we actually get 3 or 4 days cricket to watch. That'd be nice.
Very good.
Brilliant. All right. Well, that is all we've got time for on this episode of the Top Order podcast. We will be back hopefully with a larger contingent of us next week. Probably similar time to wrap up this series. We're still on Christmas time. I don't even know what day it is, let alone what date. But we will be back in your feeds to talk about news, views, and cricketing interviews from all around the world. Please do dip back into the back catalogue. We've got some pretty decent Ashes content through the course of this series. An interview with Pete Hanscom. If you've not seen that, urge you to log in and jump back a couple of podcasts and listen to an interview with a guy who's played some international and Ashes cricket for Australia in your feed. But as I said, it's now good night and God bless from us here all at Top Order Towers. We'll see you next time. Good night.